The primary votes are counted and the general election is on the horizon. A recap of the week and a look to November. Plus, should municipal bus fares go up? Then, a preview of the space mission to an asteroid. This is Metro Week. There's one more election to go this year now that Tuesday's primary contest is behind us. We'll talk about what's to come, but first, a look at the week's top news stories.
About 175,000 Pima County residents cast ballots in this week's primary election. Most of those ballots were voted early. Officials with the Pima County Elections Department say they do not expect to need to count ballots over the weekend. Officials were waiting for verification of provisional ballots in order to wrap up the tabulating. The Pima County Board of Supervisors is scheduled to certify the vote at their meeting on Tuesday. Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump visited Arizona this week for a speech on immigration policy. Trump reiterated his promise to build a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. He said Mexico will pay for that wall, it just doesn't know it yet. The speech came hours after Trump met with Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto. Following that meeting, the Mexican president tweeted that that country will not pay for the wall. Trump's speech in Phoenix was his fifth appearance in the state. A new poll shows the race for U.S. Senate in Arizona is a statistical tie. The survey conducted before the primary shows Republican John McCain and Democrat Ann Kirkpatrick both with 43% support. 15% of those respondents said they're still undecided. Pundits say Arizona's Senate race is currently a toss-up. The margin of error for the poll is 3.4%. And Mexican airline Aeromar begins flying between Tucson and 4 Mexican cities next month. The flights will connect the Old Pueblo with Hermosillo, Los Mochis, Mazatlan, Guadalajara 4 days a week. For more on all of the stories, visit our website.
Winners in Tuesday's election are looking ahead to the general election. We'll discuss county races after this look at the campaign in Arizona's 2nd congressional district. In the Democratic primary, Matt Hines beat former state lawmaker and councilor Victoria Steele. Hines is shaping the general election issues for his challenge of incumbent Republican Martha McSally.
Now we have a record. The Democrats have a record we can look at, right? We can see that Martha McSally has voted multiple times against funding Planned Parenthood, or has voted against equal pay for women, or has voted against protecting LGBT people in the workplace, and those are not the values or beliefs that are consistent with Southern Arizona.
McSally launched her campaign this week and, like Hines, points to her record, saying it's representative of voters in Southern Arizona.
I'm not running on rhetoric. I'm not running on ideas or things that you say you're going to do. I'm running on what I've done. And we've got tangible results to show, whether it's related to Davis-Monthan, keeping the A-10 flying, our 4 big wins in the long-term highway bill, getting 8 bills passed through the House, 2 signed into law. I mean, we can show, look, this is what we've been able to do.
Hines says he will focus on different issues if elected.
First and foremost is cutting through all of the bickering and actually committing to solving problems. That's more of an attitude than an issue, but then the top 2 issues beyond that, an absolute laser-like focus on jobs and the economy, infrastructure, and then of course making sure people have the type of health care that they need so that they don't get bankrupt or frankly die.
Some of those issues reach into other races, and here to analyze the rest of the political landscape, Dylan Smith of the Tucson Sentinel and my colleague Christopher Conover. Christopher, let's just start with the counting that happened Tuesday night. Why does it always seem to take so long for Pima County to count those ballots?
I talked to the elections director, Brad Nelson, and he said it's a geography issue. They have to get ballots from places like Ajo, the top of Mount Lemmon, and by the time those polls close at 7 and they actually close the polls and do all the paperwork they need and secure the ballots and drive them down into Pima County elections headquarters, it just takes time. That's their explanation.
We do see a pretty good, early release of all the early ballots that came in that are counted, and that's where
right around 8:15 or so.
Right. Generally, every year, right after 8 o'clock, we see a pretty good idea of where the vote will end up going. But for some races, it takes days and days, weeks and weeks sometimes, as we've seen, because of the provisional ballots of people voting provisionally or dropping their early ballot off at the polls, and because of the checks and balances that have to take place to make sure that people aren't actually voting twice. it takes a while. That part is understandable. There are technical hiccups that have happened in Pima County, down in Cochise County many times. At the state this year was rather frustrating trying to follow it on election night.
Yeah, what happened at the state this year?
They tried to institute a new homegrown system to report the results because of problems they've had in the past. They tried a new one, and it basically just kept falling apart. The website that was used to display the results kept falling over. It, would show no information quite frequently.
And I talked to them also, and their explanation was they gave me the technical explanation, but not being a computer programmer, it was a little lost on me, but they put it in simple English. They said it was kind of like a toll booth where a car comes in during rush hour, and instead of just throwing the money in, they stop and ask directions, and it bottles the whole thing up. They had a couple of files that were bottling up the whole information system, the distribution of the information, and it kept crashing their site.
Dylan, last week you said that in the Congressional District 1 race, all of the anti-Paul Babu sentiment might actually add up to splitting the anti-Paul Babu vote, and he, in fact, ended up winning. Is that sort of the cause of his victory, do you think?
It seems like it breaks down that way, that the other candidates in that, it was a five-way race, got to certainly scatter voting, but everybody got a decent amount of votes. It's just he certainly got plenty more than everybody else.
And actually, what is the voter registration breakdown? That's been one of the more competitive races in the past. Is it still going to be that way this year?
Democrats have a majority in that district, but it is not a big majority. And Republicans and independents are neck and neck. Independents technically have more voters, but it's only by a few thousand. And even the Democrats only have probably 20,000 more votes than independents or Republicans. So it's a very competitive district. And it's also, as you said, just so big, and which also makes it competitive because you have a conservative area like Marana, Oro Valley, in our viewing area, all the way up through Flagstaff and the Navajo Nation up to the Utah border.
I want to have a little bit of analysis now of the race in Arizona's 2nd congressional district, which we already said Matt Hines won that primary against Victoria Steele. He'll go on to face incumbent Republican Martha McSally. Why did he win?
Matt Hines probably has maybe a little better name recognition than Victoria Steele. They were both in the legislature, which really doesn't breed a lot of name recognition outside of the Capitol building, I don't think. But he's been around. He was working in Washington for the rollout of healthcare and things like that. So I think he might have a little bit better name recognition. He was also up on TV a little bit, where Victoria Steele was running a much more grassroots campaign, though I saw more of her signs out on the street than I saw Matt Hines' signs. It may have just come down to a name recognition issue.
He also really raised quite a bit more money than Victoria Steele, and thus was able to have a little bit better turnout game, actually trying to get voters to the polls. Campaign people will tell you that signs are basically about making the candidates feel good about themselves. That, even in a very, very close race, they might, affect the turnout by maybe 1.5 points. Yard signs, campaign signs along the road are just not the best way to try and get people to vote for you.
I want to shift to the Pima County races now. Christopher, we were hearing on election night some comment actually from both parties that there could be change in the majority party at the Board of Supervisors. What were people saying?
Democrats were concerned that the Pima County Board of Supervisors could go 3-2 with a Republican majority as opposed to the 3-2 Democratic majority it has. And when I was with the Republicans, they were saying the same thing. And the seat that seems to be in play, this pivot seat, is the seat held currently by Democrat Sharon Bronson. I know she told you that she's even a little nervous about this, which is interesting for a candidate to say coming into an election, especially an incumbent who's been in office for so long and so, looking at name recognition, so well known.
Mm-hmm. How likely is it that that seat could flip to Republican control?
There's, I think, a possibility, and in this kind of election year with so many variables and, the sort of chaos at the top of the Republican ticket, we don't really know how that's going to affect turnout in the general election, and I think that will have a lot to do with it.
Well, we'll be watching that race. I also want to check in on the sheriff's race. So Chris Nanos is the incumbent. He was appointed to the seat, but he's running for his first time for a full election.
He's got the title in front of his name and a little bit more name recognition.
And he's worked in the department for a long time. His opponent, Mark Napier, would be new to the sheriff's department. So are we going to see Nanos running on the former Sheriff Clarence Dupnick's reputation, name, policies? Is that what it's going to shape up to be, or is he going to try and set a different standard?
A little bit of both. You know, he's trying to say that, and has been saying since he's been in office, that the Sheriff's Department has been doing some things right. He's very proud of those. There are also, some changes that he wants to make, and to set himself apart a little bit and look a little bit different.
Mark Napier, when I talked to him, was very happy with his results. He won by almost 2-1 over his primary opponent, and he says some of that actually he attributes to name recognition. He ran 4 years ago, so people actually do know his name. And he keeps saying he's running for Sheriff of Pima County, not Sheriff of Pima County Republicans, and he's been very active going to Democratic groups and things like that to meet with them and put out this, yes, there's an R after my name on the ballot, but I will be everybody's sheriff. And that is part of the narrative that he's really working to put forward.
All right, we'll be watching all of those races. Thanks to both of you for coming in. The Tucson City Council is considering 3 options for higher municipal bus fares. Raise the fares for low-income and regular riders by a quarter over 2 years, or raise the low-income rate by 60% over 5 years with a smaller increase for regular fares, or raise only the regular fare by 1/3 in 2 years. We went downtown to ask riders about the proposals. Members of the Tucson Bus Riders Union lobby the City Council to keep fares low and service high. The group is gathering signatures to ask the council not to raise fares. Susan Willis is a member and an occasional bus rider.
There are many people who live on Social Security, which is like me, and Social Security has not increased appreciably over the last several years in terms of cost of living increases. So a lot of people are really locked into a real low budget lifestyle, and they do depend on that low-income bus pass for seniors.
One advocate says raising rates will mean fewer riders, causing the city's bus system subsidy to grow.
Sometimes, in the private sector, when you're a retailer, if you lower prices, you might actually sell more product, and then you would gain more money in the long run. The same thing could happen with the bus.
Some bus riders say they don't care about the city's budget struggles because they have financial struggles of their own.
I understand that obviously they have operating costs that they have to cover and that sort of thing, but at the same time, being a bus rider myself, and especially being on the low income pass, it's going to be a big impact on my budget. I ride all over town. I do contract PC work, and whenever I get contracts, sometimes I have to go to the Oro Valley, sometimes I have to go to the south side, sometimes I have to go far east, so I go a lot of different places.
Avali says it wouldn't matter which fare the council chooses to raise, he'd feel it.
I don't always have my card on me sometimes, so it's necessary for me to pay the full rate. They're already paying like $250 for the buses up in Phoenix, and this city's nowhere near as big as Phoenix. I don't see why they should be charging the same.
With me, I'm on low income, and it's going to hurt me a lot because I can't really. I have a sister who can help me and take me places, but all the time, and I depend on the bus a lot.
What other options does the city have?
The bus is a public good, and the city needs to really find a way to give a dedicated funding source to the buses, the same way they do with police and fire protection.
I think a tax increase for the general population would have far less of an impact than just charging the riders themselves. Because this is a service that's available for everybody.
There's a plan the Transportation Task Force has already come out with. It's a pretty good one that increases some fares where people can afford to pay more and decreases some of the others. So you end up with a plan that brings in more money but is more careful at looking at how this affects ridership.
And even if you don't ride, Farley says you should still care about those who do.
I would just encourage the people who currently don't ride the bus. I would say 2 things. Number 1, try it. We've increased the bus service and the streetcar service dramatically in the last few years, and there might actually be a way that you could get from A to B in a way that's more pleasant and cheaper than what you're doing now in your car. And number two, if you're never going to ride the bus, you still have a vested interest in getting people out of the way and onto the bus so that you can drive in less congestion.
One of the 3 proposals to increase bus fares came from Tucson Mayor Jonathan Rothschild, who joins me in the studio. Why don't we start with the details of your fare proposal?
First, Council back in May passed a budget. It's a balanced budget, and what it included in it was an increase in transit fares. So all the council voted, and we voted 7-0, that we would have this balanced budget and there would be this component of it. The manager subsequently came forward and put a proposal forward. I looked at the proposal and I had a concern, and the concern was what I've heard from constituents, which is that the lowest fare riders are those riders who really can't afford more. The manager had a very small increase for the lowest fare riders, but what I said is, what if we didn't increase the lowest fare riders at all, but then in place of that, tried to raise a few other rates to make up for that difference? So that's what my proposal is. It keeps the lowest fare riders at the same, but increases the choice riders by a very minimal amount.
And what's the dollar amount that you're trying to reach to meet that budget number?
We're looking for about $1.5 million, and I don't have that number exact, but it's in that range.
On top of what the fares already bring in, or that's the total amount?
No, that would be on top of what we already bring in.
Now tell me how this fits into the overall city budget. Why is this necessary?
Well, we have scoured every department, and every department has taken reductions. Some of them have been for efficiencies. And transit, we have not raised rates in years. And the fact of the matter is costs continue to go up. And if we want to have more riders, and I think that's everybody's goal, then we need to have reliable quality service. And to get that reliable quality service, it takes money. And all users of whatever the municipal service is contribute. And so what I think council has said is it's time to make at least a small adjustment after a number of years to put more money into the system and to make that a more quality system, so hopefully we will get more riders.
Some of the bus riders we talked to said instead of just raising the fares, since this is a citywide service, why not put in a citywide tax or some other way to raise money that doesn't just affect those who choose or have to ride the bus?
So we are looking at, and I think we all agree, by the way, that the long-term solution is a regional transit authority. That's what cities our size and larger all have. We have a regional transportation authority, the RTA, and we're looking at reauthorization there. And when we're looking at reauthorization there, we're going to look at a way to fund the transit system, which will be much more vibrant because it will include the entire region. At this point, the city really bears a disproportionate share of the burden for all of that. So that is something that we're looking at, but at the same time, we are looking at revenue sources, but we're looking at roads still, we're looking at public safety still, and we're looking at parks. Those are our core services.
This is on the City Council agenda for Tuesday. What's going to be happening that day? Will there be a final decision?
There could be. We hold a public hearing, so people will have an opportunity to be heard again, and we will take that input, and we can decide it that night. A council member needs to make a motion, there needs to be a second, and there is a opportunity to resolve it that night. If something comes up that makes council want to rethink at least coming to a proposal within what we already have, then that could be delayed. But the delay can't be long because we have a budget that we've committed to.
All right, thanks for explaining that. It's been a dozen years since scientists at the University of Arizona's Lunar and Planetary Laboratory came up with the idea to send a spacecraft to an asteroid, get a sample, and bring it back to Earth for study. As Sarah Hammond reports, the launch is now looming.
Next week, the mission called OSIRIS-REx is scheduled to blast off from Kennedy Space Center on a 7-year journey to accomplish that goal. Once again, the U of A is at the helm of space exploration and science. This mission is even more daring than the Phoenix Mars mission that successfully sent a lander to the surface of the Red Planet in 2008 to look for signs of water. The target is a carbon-rich rock in near-Earth orbit. First observed in 1999, the asteroid, named Bennu, is a pristine sample of primitive material that dates back to the formation of the solar system. Researchers will be looking for clues to the origin of life on Earth. OSIRIS-REx will spend 2 years traveling to the asteroid, which includes orbiting the Sun for a year and passing by Earth for a gravitational boost next year. Once at Bennu, the spacecraft will spend 2 years mapping the nearly half-mile wide rock looking for the place to sample. The OSIRIS-REx team has promised NASA to return at least 60 grams of material, called regolith. After getting a sample in 2020, the spacecraft will head for home, with arrival expected in Utah in September 2023.
Sarah Hammond has been covering this story for months, and she joins us for more about the pre-launch process. I see you brought a visual aid, and I can't wait to get to that, but let's just start with what the spacecraft and the team is doing for the next week.
Well, most everybody's in Florida by now, and they've been having some readiness reviews this week. The launch vehicle is assembled and ready to go. Next week, there'll be a launch readiness review on Tuesday. And then Wednesday, the whole rocket, the launch vehicle moves out to the launch pad. They'll fuel it and wait for Thursday night.
And that's the beginning of the launch window. So what does that mean about exactly when the launch is expected?
Correct. They have 34 days set aside to get OSIRIS-REx into space. So if for some reason it can't go Thursday, there's a 2-hour window Friday, and then for the next 30-some days beyond that.
But it's also hurricane season, right?
Very much. There's always a weather threat or potential weather threat. There can be boats in the secure area off the Cape, and there can also be mechanical difficulties. But they try to go for that first opening for the first launch.
So what happens when it launches?
The OSIRIS-REx spacecraft is going to be launched on a fairly large launch vehicle. It's an Atlas V rocket, and it has a little booster attached to the side. So it takes off, the booster burns out, the first stage burns, it cuts off and separates. Then the second stage burns once, shuts off, burns a second time, and then it shuts down. The spacecraft then separates from that second stage. And about 59 minutes into the space flight, the solar arrays will open, and by an hour and 17 seconds, they'll know that the spacecraft is healthy and on its way to the asteroid named Bennu.
You're actually going to be there in Florida next week, and it
I
won't
will
be
be
your
there.
first launch. So what is it like to see something like this?
It's pretty amazing. I have been to 2 unmanned launches in the past. And you're standing quite a ways away from it, but you see the fire, you see the smoke, and then you feel the vibration and hear the noise. I mean, it consumes you. It's a very exciting opportunity.
Even though you're really far away, right?
Several miles, yes.
Yeah. So then it takes a few years to actually get to the asteroid.
Right. The spacecraft will make an orbit around the Sun for a year. It'll pass by Earth next year, get a little boost from our gravity to move it out towards Bennu. It will arrive at Bennu in 2018, so that's 2 years. And those will be a critical 2 years. The spacecraft will map every inch, every centimeter, every millimeter of that space rock to find just the right spot to take a sample. And interestingly enough, the spacecraft will not land on the asteroid, and it's not going to scoop up the sample.
So how's it going to get it?
Well, it has a head on it. The spacecraft will approach the asteroid at 1/4 mile an hour, and it's about a 12-inch round head. It will touch the asteroid and send out a poof of nitrogen gas. That will stir up the dirt that it's going to collect, and then that dirt will go into the head. It'll go back into the spacecraft and into the sample return capsule, and then it'll be on its way back.
So here's the part I've been waiting for.
Okay.
How much material are they expecting to collect?
They've promised NASA 60 grams. Now, how much is 60 grams? Well, let's take a look. I measured it out. This is from my backyard, And this is the minimum amount of dirt and rock that they hope to bring back. Their tests have been 150 grams, 300 grams, and the mechanism on the spacecraft can take up to 2 kilograms or 4.4 pounds. That would be a real benefit.
So again, this is the minimum, but it could be a lot more.
It can be a lot more, and they expect a lot more. But I just wanted to measure out, what does 60 grams look like?
Yeah, we don't work in those measurements very often here.
2.1 ounces.
Okay, and then where does that go when it comes back?
Well, interestingly enough, the sample capsule will come back and land in the Utah desert, where other samples have come back. It will go to Johnson Space Center. That's the secure, clean place for it to be curated. And it will not all stay in the United States. Japan has a spacecraft on its way to a different asteroid. They're going to get 0.5% of the sample. The Canadian Space Agency is going to get 4% of it, and this is their first time having possession of space material. They're very excited. And then 75% of the sample is going to be just set aside for future study, for questions that we don't know to ask yet, and lab material or lab equipment that hasn't even been developed yet.
Thanks, Sarah. We'll be watching next week. And this week, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan was in Tucson to deliver a speech at the invitation of the U of A's James E. Rogers College of Law. AZPM's Vanessa Barchfield brings us excerpts from that lecture.
There isn't much religious diversity on the court. There is not very much racial or ethnic diversity on the court. What should the American people think about that in terms of the possibilities of 9 people with such power?
I don't think that those traits, have all that much to do with the way we decide cases. I think that they do have a lot to do with the way that the court is perceived as an institution. And that's just the fact of the matter, is that people look at an institution and they see people who are like them, who share their experiences, who they imagine share their set of values, and that's a sort of natural thing, and they feel more comfortable in that if that occurs. So, sometimes I look out at the court and I see big school groups, and I think, isn't it great that there are 3 women here, and the 3 women, we're all very vocal at oral argument. So all these girls and all these boys in these school groups are sort of watching this, and they're getting messages about who they can be, and they also see the court in a way that they can relate to. And I think that that's true whether it comes to whether it's about gender or about ethnicity or about geography or about the law school you came from or any number of other things. And so I think for that reason it is important to take these things into account in selecting justices. And for that reason, I wish that the court were a little bit more diverse than it is.
What would you like the American people to know that might make them more confident about the claim that the justices are law guardians and not legislators in robes, or not subject to political pressures, undue political pressures that undermine the independence of the institution?
I mean, you are subject to political pressures in the sense of, presidents can nominate whoever they want, and then the Senate has a role, and an important role, in confirming people. And so the political process surely is brought to bear in the nomination and appointment of Supreme Court justices. But they should have that role. It should be right that the political process at some point gets to weigh in on the people who become justices, because after those people become justices, there really aren't any political constraints. I mean, I think none of us think about, would the president like this or not like this? Or would Congress like this or not like this? It's utterly irrelevant to us when we decide cases. Our role is essentially to provide a check on the political institutions, on the political process, on majoritarian impulses, and to say, to police a body of rules and to be able to say, here the political process has gone too far. Here the majorities don't get their way. And that's the role of the court, and there's nothing anybody can do about it when we exercise that role. I mean, there's no way to punish us. You can't take away our salary. I mean, you can only impeach us for crimes, not for doing what we're supposed to be doing. So we're pretty independent operators.
That's it for us. As always, you can find more stories, including full election results, on our website. Stay tuned for Arizona Week later with analysis of the U.S. Senate race. Thanks for watching.